It's 3:10 and we've reached a quorum, so we'll go ahead and get started. Our first item of business is to approve the minutes from our last Senate meeting on November 12th. Does anyone have any comments or changes that need to be made to the minutes? Do we have any objections to the passing of the minutes? Since I hear no objections, the minutes are passed and we'll move on. So first up, our administrative reports, and we're going to start with Vice Chancellor and Provost Jerry Hale.
Thank you very much, President Simmons. I feel like for the last few of these between the Chancellor's forums on Wednesday and the Thursday sessions that we've been doing, that I begin each one of these with an apology for some redundancy. This will be probably the briefest of the reports that I'll make to the Faculty Senate, in part because the major issue is one that has been discussed a lot and in a variety of public forums. But the only item that I wanted to bring to your attention is an item related to scheduling for the fall semester and the plan and what we have asked the Council of Academic Department Heads, program directors, and deans to anticipate and plan for. What we have asked them to do is to plan for two different contingencies. The first is one that is optimistic and asks for planning and building out a schedule that looks like a schedule that we would have seen in the fall of 2019, so a pre-COVID schedule. But also being mindful that that optimism might not be realized. And so to have as a backup plan or a contingency also to plan for a schedule that looks more like the schedule that we have now with regard to the distribution of courses. And for those of you who have missed discussions of the distribution of courses as they have occurred in the Wednesday afternoon forums or Thursday morning ones, right now we are at I believe the last report was around 34% of our courses in some face-to-face format, either completely face-to-face or a hybrid format. Matt Matthews, I know you're on the call, so please unmute yourself and speak up if I am way off in my recollections of those estimates. And then the remaining courses are ones that are being taught either synchronously or asynchronously online. And so that's what we're asking people to plan for. We're asking them to load a schedule initially that will look like a fall 2019 schedule or one pre-COVID, but to be planning as a contingency for a schedule and a move or a pivot to something that looks much more like what we're doing now. And that's the major issue with the scheduling process being underway as it is and needing to move forward.
Thank you, Provost Hale. Are there any questions for the Provost?
I have a question not related to the fall, but I've had a few faculty members come to me for this spring whose classes were set to be online synchronous. So like that's how it was set in the schedule. If it was say 12 to 12:50 Monday, Wednesday, Friday, students would be there 12 to 12:50 Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But they're having a lot of students emailing them saying, I didn't know this was synchronous and I can't make class. What can you do for me? And so I was wondering, what would be the best option to report back, especially since you all did such a, in my opinion, really good job of making it very clear which classes are synchronous, which classes are asynchronous, et cetera.
Well, and I agree with your assessment of that. I think there was nothing unclear about the schedule and the course designations that the registrar provided and for us to include into the schedule. And the difficulty is, even though some students may reach out to faculty members with difficulties in that way, there are always going to be students in the same class that knew exactly what they were registering for. And so we are asking faculty members to hold the line and to teach the courses in the modalities that we put in the schedule and that students are registered for.
Right. How do you recommend they reply to the students who are have sent some very angry emails that I can't make this? What are you going to do for me?
Well, I would encourage them to, that is, encourage the students during the drop and add period to look for something that that can be accommodated by their schedule, or to look to change some other portion of their schedule. It's interesting to me, and it may be a work thing or something else, but it's interesting to me that the default solution for those students appears to be that the class needs to change and not that some other portion of the student's schedule needs to change.
I agree, and thank you. Just didn't know, especially because some of these faculty are not tenured and maybe under a little bit more scrutiny. If they push back against the students, they know this is the course meeting time and you can't make it. I'm not sure what you would like me to do. So thank you.
Any other questions for the provost?
And President Simmons, I would interject one other thing, and that is there are some other issues and related to other reports that are coming later in the agenda that also relate to academic affairs. So academic affairs is certainly not getting short shrift by virtue of my very brief comments here. You'll hear from Vice Provost Matt Matthews about a major system-wide initiative coming up and a couple of other items that relate definitely to academic affairs as well. So thank you for the opportunity to report, and I'll look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Now, Vice Chancellor Yancey Freeman will be presenting a little bit later when we get to new business. Is there any other administrator on the call who wanted to do a report? All right, then we'll move on to committee reports. We have two committees bringing items forward. The first committee up is the Undergraduate Academic Standards Committee. Amanda Clark is here to talk about a change in language related to minors.
Hi there, thanks for having me. Last semester, a member of our campus community came to the Academic Standards Committee and asked that we take up for discussion a section of that academic catalog that specifically discusses the minor requirements. So this section of the catalog that President Simmons has given us on the screen here is within the degree and graduation requirements section of the catalog. And currently, it states that students cannot major and minor within the same discipline, that no more than 6 credit hours in the major department may be applied to a minor, that students majoring in art may also minor in art history, and that students majoring in HHP programs may also minor in nutrition. Now, the current language in the catalog has kind of created some complexity because the word discipline in that first sentence is currently being interpreted as departments. And so that's problematic for students that are pursuing degrees and programs that are housed in departments that have multiple programs. So we're talking about art, which is mentioned currently, but also BGES, SCJS, both within the College of Arts and Sciences and in others. So the Academic Standards Committee in the fall proposed in our committee to amend the language to students cannot major and minor within the same program, that no more than 6 hours of credit in the major program may be applied to the minor. Basically just lifting that additional sentence about art history and about nutrition, and clarifying that the intention would be that a student, let's say in biology, couldn't use biology courses to satisfy both a major and a minor, but that they would be able to maybe use environmental science courses to satisfy a minor and biology courses to satisfy a major, just as an example. So late in the fall semester, the Academic Standards Committee voted on this proposal and it was unanimously supported. So now we bring it to the Faculty Senate for consideration.
So I open the floor to discussion of the proposed language change.
Yeah, I have a question. So when I was head of the English department, so we have 3 tracks in the English department. So you can be, you might be a literature English major or a creative writing English major or a rhetoric and composition English major. So sometimes I had students come to me, they were creative writing English majors and they wanted their minor to be in literature. And of course, I always said, no, can't be done. Your minor needs to be outside of the English department. Does this language still, in your mind, make it clear that that would not be acceptable? Because that would still be within the same department. And that, I think, is the, you know, so I'm just not sure. Again, I guess it depends on how one is interpreting the word program in the proposed language. But as long as that's the understanding, I'm fine with it. But I would be very much opposed to somebody being a literature track English major with a minor in creative writing, which seems to me too narrow and it goes against the idea of a minor. But
I think the intention of our proposed language is that what you're saying, Chris, in English would not be allowed. So a student who's a professional writing track for their major would not be able to have a minor in creative writing. But let me clarify, within both of those tracks, any courses would have the same course code of ENGL, correct?
that is correct, yep.
So what our intention is with this language about program is that the course codes would have to be different to count in for the major separately from the minor.
Okay, good, thank you.
Other questions or comments? All right, since this is coming from a committee, we don't need a first and second. We can just move to voting. So we'll vote. Remember, for the senators, you want to open up your participant panel and use the yes and no buttons to vote for or against the proposed language change. And I'll give you a minute or so to do that. Okay, we're having a technical difficulty, I think, because we had an update to Zoom. Before, we used to see the votes stay until we cleared them and so we could count. But now they seem to be appearing and disappearing before we can finish counting them. So I think we're just going to have to do a traditional roll call vote to make sure that we get everyone's vote recorded, because we do need a numbered vote because we're changing a catalog. So I'm just going to announce names of senators, and then when your name, if you can just say yes or no. I'll start with the officers. Tammy Garland.
Yes.
Jamie Harvey.
Yes.
And then it's alphabetical by your first name, because that's how I find you guys in Zoom. So Alexandra Zellin.
Yes.
Ann Swedberg.
Yes.
Barry Camreth.
Yes.
Bernadette Dupre.
Yes.
Beth Crawford.
Yes.
Brian Rogers. I don't think he's here. Chandra Ward. Charlotte Ellington.
Yes.
Chris Stewart.
Yes.
David Giles.
Yes.
Donald Rising. Is
Yes.
Donald, okay, there we go. Eleni Pantagauto.
Yes,
Sorry, I'm very bad at
it's okay.
figuring out names phonetically. Erica Schaefer.
Yes.
Ethan's not here. Hill Craddock. Ignatius Famanange.
Yes.
Irina Kamelko.
Yes.
Jacqueline Michael.
Yes.
Joni Jackson.
Yes.
Jody Kasky.
Yes.
Joshua Hamblin.
Yes.
Julia Kaminsky.
Yes.
Lanny Gao.
She has a yes in the text chat.
Okay, that works. I got you, Lanny. Liz Hathaway.
Yes.
Marissa Colston.
Yes.
Mingzhan Ji.
Yes.
Natalie Osley.
Yes.
Nicholas Bohr.
Yes.
Phil Roundy.
Yes.
Priscilla Sims Robertson.
Yes.
Ron Goulet. Sarah Einstein.
Yes.
Spencer Usery.
Yes.
Susan Thule.
Yes.
Stephanie Gillison.
Yes.
Wes Smith.
Yes.
Zibin Gao.
Yes.
All right, fabulous. Thank you. We'll move on to our next committee. That passed, obviously. We'll move on to our next committee, which is the General Education Reimagining Committee, and Lauren Ingram is here.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here today. So we've been meeting, and I just wanted to give you a little update on where we are right now. So as you know, Chancellor Angle announced in the State of the University address last semester that a thorough review of our general education program was one of the top priorities. It's included in our strategic planning work. It's definitely a top priority. So we have, since there is so much sort of planning work going on campus, it's been very interesting to me to see how sort of the same kinds of ideas about what we want to do more of and do a better job of is sort of popping up in these different committee meetings, the strategic planning meetings, the meaningful learning experiences subcommittee of the strategic planning committee, and then our committee as well. I also wanted to focus a little bit on the word reimagining. If you look back at our history of general education redesign, we have spent multiple years at every given time, lots of conversation, and ended up with a fairly similar new program to the old program. In some years there have been, more changes than others, but our general education program that we have right now is fairly similar to what we had in the 1980s. And I'm sure we all recognize that the world is a very different place right now than it was in 1985. So we really are looking at coming to this with fresh eyes, new ideas to really rethink what we're doing in our general education program and what kind of experience we can offer our students. Next slide. So this went out in an email. I just wanted to remind you of the committee membership. We have representatives from all of our colleges. We have staff who work with students in different important ways on student success, and on staff who help us ensure that we're meeting all of our requirements that we need to meet. And right now we have one student named. We're looking to name 2 others. But I think the students who serve on committees like this are really interested in leaving a legacy for the students who come after them. So I'm very excited to get those next 2 students in place. Thank you. So the first thing that we're doing right now is establishing design and process principles to guide our work. If you look at the literature on best practices in general education reform or redesign, this is one of the first things that you need to tackle. So design principles establish some parameters around what the new program is going to look like. And then process principles really sort of give us some rules about how we're going to proceed, how we're going to get to our end product, how we're going to get to implementation. Next slide. So what I wanted to share with you, the committee voted, we voted by email, and only one committee member did not respond at all, did not vote at all, but otherwise this was a unanimous adoption of these design and process principles. You probably can't see my little box where I'm talking right now, but it all fits nicely on one piece of paper, if you can see that. So that's convenient. We open these principles with a preamble, and if you'll bear with me, I'll just read it aloud. The Reimagining General Education Committee is leading UTC's work to design an innovative academic program that prepares our 21st century students for a long, rich, and varied life after graduation. To that end, we aim to develop a program that offers students an array of meaningful learning experiences, invites and allows them to study in multiple disciplines, addresses their need to learn about diverse perspectives other than their own, and prepares them for informed and effective civic engagement. Improving student learning is the key purpose of our work. The following design and process principles will guide it. So we have 6 design principles. We want to make sure that this new design prioritizes or embraces broad areas of learning and skills that can be satisfied through courses offered by many departments and encourages some cross-disciplinary offerings at work. This interdisciplinary piece is something we really want to pursue. Students really enjoy learning in those sort of ways, and I think faculty can be renewed if they're asked to think about their discipline through the lens of how it fits with work that other colleagues are doing in their disciplines. Second design principle, we want to make sure that we incorporate high impact practices and experiential learning as much as possible. Third, we're going to prioritize issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our curricular design. One of the things that people have talked about a little bit is, can we add a diversity requirement to our general education program? And while that impulse, I think, is a valuable one, an important one, one of the things that we want to think through is not thinking about diversity as an add-on, but as a built-in throughout the program. So that's why we want to make sure that we're keeping that a priority area throughout the design process. We want to design a program that avoids aligning a single requirement or category with an individual department. I think that will help with some of the siloing problems that we currently have in our program. Fifth, we want to design an accessible, able to be assessed fairly, program that is compliant with internal and external regulations, such as UTC's academic standards, SAC-COC accreditation principles, and THEC requirements. And depending on how good your eyesight is, you might be able to read the footnote there, but it sort of summarizes what SACS requires us to do. We have a minimum of 30 credit hours, 1 course each in humanities and fine arts, social and behavioral sciences, and natural sciences and mathematics. And no courses that focus on a skill that is relevant to only one occupation or profession. That skill piece is really important to think about, because I think sometimes people stop that sentence after the word skill, right? So no courses that focus on a skill. That's not what the SACS guidelines say. there are some really important lifelong skills that we're talking about trying to incorporate more into the general education program. Skills like problem solving, writ large, critical thinking, quantitative reasoning, scientific understanding, that sort of thing. Sixth, the last design principle, create some flexibility in the program to account for discipline-specific outside accreditation requirements. We already have that in our current program, but we want to explore other ways we might do that beyond just simple exemptions for certain programs that that are required to have more than 120 hours to complete for graduation. And the process principles, how are we going to do this work? So number one is really important. We are really committed to a schedule that allows us to move quickly. So we're looking at having the requirements and learning outcomes defined by early spring 2022, having courses certified in fall 2022, and the new program implemented in fall 2023. One of the reasons that I think we can do this and meet this schedule is that several members of the committee were involved in the Gen Ed refresh of a few years ago and have done a lot of immersive thinking and looking at general education programs across the country, thinking about what kinds of things we want to try to do with our Gen Ed program after really talking with a lot of students and colleagues and advisors and community members and employers who hire our graduates. So we've done a lot of that legwork already. We will continue to do more of that. But that's why I'm confident that we can get this work done much more quickly than we have in the past. Number two, we want to actively involve faculty, students, advisors, and staff, and seek input from alumni and community members to do this work. As I said, we're going to continue to actively ask people to share their thoughts with us. We want to be accountable for prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion by asking the campus community, especially UTC's organizations that are committed to addressing these issues, to review and enhance program components throughout the process. So we're going to schedule in lots of accountability feedback spots, for lack of a better term. 4, we want this to be a transparent process. So we want to push out information about what we're doing to lots of different spaces so that it's accessible. So students will know what's going on, staff will know, faculty will know. It'll be available on a soon to be set up Reimagining General Education Committee website. And finally, but not the least important, ensure that UTC's Office of Academic Affairs will devote resources to this work. So not only resources to support the design, but also once we begin implementing this, we're going to need to continue to have faculty development workshops, that sort of thing that will be needs that we have as we sort of launch the program. So I see that there are things going on in the chat, but I haven't looked at them yet. And I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Lauren, if I may, I have a couple of questions. The first is, would you be willing to share these slides so that we can take them back to other faculty and give them an update?
Oh, sure.
That'd be great.
Hold on one second. Charlene, do you post all the slides for the Faculty Senate meeting?
I can. We usually don't, but I can. That's not a problem because the next couple, I know Yancey's presentation is chart heavy, so I'll post the whole packet of slides from this meeting.
Thank you. And my second question is, I was wondering if you, speaking of transparency, could speak to how the committee was comprised, how people were selected, and in particular, I know I've heard from a few people that were concerned that representatives of departments that have historically done a lot of Gen Ed courses and faculty who have served on the Gen Ed refresh and things weren't included. So I know you can't have everybody the bigger it is, the more unwieldy it gets. But I was hoping you could speak a little bit to how you selected people. Yeah, that would be helpful, I think.
Sure. So I looked at making sure that we had representation from all the colleges first. I really wanted to include people from the Gen Ed refresh effort, some of whom have continued to be deeply involved in Gen Ed work sort of at the institutional level. So for example, Shawani Howard Baptiste not only was involved in the Gen Ed refresh, but she also was part of a 5-member team that went to a General Education and Assessment Institute at the University of Vermont 2 summers ago, I believe. With me, Greg O'Day was part of that team as well. I consulted with Matt Matthews and Provost Hale, and invited Charlene Simmons to take a look. And we were trying to put together this sort of jigsaw puzzle of a committee that has individuals that sort of wear multiple sets of hats or shoes, you know, that sort of help us create a diverse committee. Yes, it is true that we cannot have members that represent every single department, or even departments that do, you know, pull their fair share of Gen Ed right now. But I would also say that because we are a reimagining committee, we really are trying to look forward and not rely so closely on what we currently do. Having said that, though, I also just really want to stress that we're going to be having work groups. I don't know exactly what that'll look like. That's going to come out of some of the design thinking and the listening that we're going to be doing over the next couple of months, to think about what those work groups should be. And certainly we want to open those up as widely as possible to get people involved who want to be involved.
Lauren, do you, to what extent does it seem practical? I think it was on the previous slide, but anyway, it's like number 2, and it was something about not having requirements that are entirely devoted to one department. That is, where one department is entirely responsible for that. But for the most part, English has been responsible for the composition requirement, for example. I mean, there's a little bit of history has a composition course, and I can't even recall if there are other departments that do, but that's the one I have in mind. Is that actually practical in math and English?
We're going to see. We're going to see. One of the things that's been really interesting in thinking about how we can reframe the way we look at general education is that if we realign the skills or the learning that we're asking for from our students to something like quantitative reasoning over math, well, that sort of opens things up and create some opportunities maybe that students don't currently have that they might be really interested in. So I don't think that there's any way that we can offer this sort of broad foundational academic program without including English and math and history and, you know, the sort of the main kind of arts and sciences pieces of a strong foundational college education. But I do think we might be able to think about it in some different, interesting ways.
Yeah, I think so too. And I don't need to belabor this point, but I do think that, you know, at my brother's institution, which is a small liberal arts college, the writing requirement is fulfilled by a lot of different departments because they simply have a thing called the writing seminar, and it's taught in philosophy and in a whole lot of other departments. So my brother regularly teaches that, although he's a philosopher. And so the students don't take composition, they take that. And that would, of course, if we were to do something like that, it would transform the English department, given how many of our lecturers are devoted to teaching all those compositions. It would change who has jobs in what department and stuff like that. And I'm just wondering if that's anyway, there's a lot to think about, I think.
There is.
The ramifications of that would be large.
That becomes one of the equity issues that we talk about too, right? As we think about a new design, how does that design impact different faculty members and different faculty members at different ranks, right? So, yeah.
I also don't want to belabor my point, and I want to be clear that I think everything you're describing sounds really exciting. I do, for programs that are so high stakes moving forward, I personally would love to see an invitation to go out to people to express interest in participation, because I think there are people that have stakes in this that may not have been obvious. And I think it would be helpful to invite people who, I mean, on the one hand, I really appreciate that people who have experience, who have been involved in this going forward, continue to, that we capitalize on that experience, right? That we capitalize on that thinking. But I think that there are probably people who have really creative ideas who are really invested in this. And I'm excited. I'm looking forward to seeing the ways that you are going to bring them into this process in the future. But I think that we do need to prepare for the fact that this is going to create a lot of anxiety for a lot of people. That as much as this is going to create no opportunities, there are people who are going to be concerned that their contribution in the existing program is going to be eliminated, is going to be minimized. And so I think anything that the committee can do to keep this really transparent, to invite input, is going to, if not alleviate those concerns, at least be respectful of them and give people an opportunity to sort of have that input.
Right, yeah, thank you for that comment. So I think I mentioned briefly earlier, where we are now is we're going to do a little more training with the committee on a design thinking method as a way of thinking about how we create this new model. It is a type of thinking that allows you to first, it requires you first to build empathy with the people who are going to be using this model, right? So faculty who are going to be teaching in this model, students who, if they were future students, would be taking classes in this model or doing work in this model. And so once we get that training done over the next few weeks, then we will definitely begin this very intensive sort of listening and input gathering and invitations to share your thoughts with us and share your, even the degree to which you want to be involved. So that's definitely a major piece of this. And gen ed redesign is always anxiety provoking at every institution that has ever done it. It's sort of baked into the cake, but we're going to try to get through it as best we can, as colleagues, and smiling and having serious conversations, but trying to keep this thing moving along.
Any other questions or comments for Lauren?
Okay, thanks everybody.
All right, thank you, Lauren. We're gonna move on. First item under new business, Dr. Freeman is here to talk about COVID-19 and student achievement.
Thank you, Dr. Simmons. I appreciate it. We didn't talk. Oh, great. You have the presentation right in front of me, so I don't have to worry about figuring out how to share screen on this. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk with Faculty Senate about student success and what has occurred over the spring of 2020, fall of 2020, and of course now we're in spring of 21. Before I go on, I want to make sure that I give a special shout out to my partners in crime in this, and they are Dr. Matthews from the Academic Affairs Office, Vice Provost in the Academic Affairs Office, and also Stacy Grisham, who is in Enrollment Management Student Affairs. We are always looking at this information to determine how we do programming around student success and how we need to pivot, and so they are on the call and will help. And then I want to make sure that I especially point out Dr. Sherry Marlowe Ornsby, who is in our institutional research area, and she is absolutely the person that I go to ask why. Some reason my phone is ringing, I have no idea. Okay, let's see if I can stop it. But she is the person that I'm always asking what, as it relates to data and information, as we try to determine how we maneuver to change. And so she put a lion's share of this together and is gonna stop me if I error or if more needs to be added. So this first slide just gives a enrollment comparison, and I apologize on the front end of this because it is a lot of data that I am going to push at you, and I know you'll get a copy of these slides, and I'm happy to answer questions today or at a later time. But this first one is an enrollment headcount comparison so that you can see what is there around undergraduate headcount, graduate headcount, and where we are compared to fall 19, fall 20, spring 19, spring 20, and then summer. We've been pretty consistent and pretty flat in terms of enrollment overall. That's not a bad thing. In particular, these last couple of semesters, when you look at summer, fall, and also this spring, it's certainly not bad for us to be flat, given we are in a COVID-19 environment and students are making very different choices about where to enroll. Next slide. The next piece of this deals with withdrawal rate. And as we think about student success, it is our goal to keep students in courses, because if they are enrolled in those courses and they complete the courses, it means it's quicker progression to graduation each year. And so we wanted to give you some information about withdrawal rates. This is comparing spring of 2019. Our overall withdrawal rate was 1.9% of courses. Compared to spring of 2020, there was a 2.3% withdrawal rate. So not a significant amount in terms of overall withdrawal rate, but you will see it did impact some of our marginalized, underrepresented groups on campus. When you look at non-resident aliens, there was a 3.5% increase there. African-American, Black students, students who indicated 2 or more races, and even international students. We saw some jumps in those numbers overall, but this does give you an indication of all withdrawals. There was not a big increase, but in some of those affinity groups, we did see some increases there. Next slide. This is doing the same thing for the fall. It's comparing information for the fall, looking at fall 2019 and spring of 2020. In terms of withdrawal rates, you'll see that there was not a significant increase, about a 0.5% increase. There was an increase, and we can almost anticipate that that is true, would be true given the climate of where we are going through a pandemic. Again, we see that there were some groups that were impacted with this, with the 2 or more, with a 3.2% increase, and Black African American students at 2.7% increase in terms of withdrawal rates in this area. Okay, next slide. This gives some information about the grade option change. Most of you know that as we went into spring 20, we stopped instruction almost midstream when COVID arrived and we knew we were having cases here. We evacuated the residence halls. We stopped sort of instruction, took some time to put everything online. And at the end of that semester, it was such a difficult semester, and we were in such a quandary that we did offer an opportunity for students to do SNC grading. And so you'll see the jump in spring 2019 versus spring 2020 in terms of the overall numbers of students who took us up on that option. Comparatively, we increased significantly around the NC grading and more than double the number of students who opted to do the S. And again, as you see, the number in terms of withdrawal rate did not change significantly between spring 19 and spring 20. Dr. Matthews, you mentioned to me, and I can't recall right now, I will ask you to unmute for me and remind me out of how many courses we're looking at overall.
This is spring. I think we're usually around 2,300 courses.
Okay. Okay.
Is that what are you talking about? Oh, number of the, right. This was actually about the number of grades. I mentioned
right, the number of grades.
Yeah, we have around 50,000 grades, I think, that get reported every semester.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So if you are comparatively looking at the number of grades that are there, these are still small margins, but we did see an increase based on sort of our need to pivot at the end of the spring 20 semester, given everything that had occurred. I will mention to you, we had students who, when we emptied the residence halls, we were getting some word back from students that they were having issues with food insecurity. They didn't know where they were going to eat. Many of you will remember we had the tornado that occurred in Chattanooga Easter weekend, which was around that same time. And then there was a tornado in Nashville. And so we had some students who didn't have a home to return to. There were technology issues. And so given all of those things, and in the middle of a pandemic, we did decide to go with the SNC grading. And so you see the information there. Next slide. This gives you some idea about credit completion and grade point average for those students overall, looking at undergraduate students. This was not too bad. Undergraduate students in spring of 20 completed 91% of their credits versus 88% in spring of 2019. So that was not bad at all. We saw a little bit of a decline with graduate students at 92% of credit completed versus 96% in 2019. And then you'll see the GPA comparison was slightly higher for both groups, undergraduate and graduate, when you're looking at spring 19 in the blue versus spring of 20 in the gold color that's here. So not some drastic drops in terms of overall numbers for students who were completing credit and or in grade point average. In fact, we saw some modest increase in those numbers, which is a really good sign considering what we've had to maneuver and do. Go ahead, next slide, Dr. Simmons. This gives the same comparison to information for fall of 2020. So 88% of the credits in fall of 2020 for undergraduate versus 89% in fall 2019. So a slight decrease there. Again, graduate students came back, bounced back, although it was 96% credits in 2020 versus 95% in 2019 completed. And so we saw some, some increases there. And the GPA again for students compared to fall modestly increased for each of those terms when you're looking at fall 19 and fall 20 for graduate and undergraduate students. So those are really good signs overall in terms of completion rates and grade point average and ability to continue. Next slide. So this is the retention rate for all students. And this is a heavy slide. And like I said, I apologize for the amount of data that's there that I'm asking you to consume in a very short period of time. But if you were looking at this, you can see the undergraduate number. And in particular, if you're looking all the way over to the right column under not retained, we had 11.5% of our undergraduate students who were not retained, 7.6% of our graduate, and 11% overall of all students. One thing I want to point to your attention is the number of undergraduate part-time students. That's where we took a big hit in terms of the number of retained students that were there. Only about half of those students came back, to us after from spring until fall of 20. It does make sense that is true when you think about what employment looked like during this COVID outbreak. I was reading a study and saw something that said that since 1960, when the economy takes a downturn, students return back to college. And that's been true every time since 1960. COVID has finally, another record, has finally broken that, and we've seen that not to be true this time. And so we know that students are kind of struggling through this and making decisions about whether or not they can afford it and can they be here and making different decisions. So this does not in any way surprise me, but this does give you a very good idea about what that retention rate looks like across all students and how many of them return to us overall. So next slide, Dr. Simmons, thank you. This one gives a snapshot of the midterm grades. 77.9% of the undergraduate midterm grades were A, B, or C. And if you're looking at the fall 2019 versus fall 2020 comparison with those grades, you'll see that we had more students who achieved an A, fewer students who had a C grade, and then the remaining ones, fewer with a D and in terms of failing grades, you'll see that number is pretty comparable as it stands. And so we did see some increases in the numbers of students who had passing grades at the midterm. It was an increase of 4% in terms of passing grades for fall 2019 to fall 20. And so that is a really good sign. We have an early alert campaign that I am going to show you sort of the premise of that program. And we think it may be part of what helped us overall in terms of looking at these midterm grades. Go ahead to the next slide. This early alert program is one that we direct at first-time freshmen. And so we ask faculty members in English and also math, and then the freshman seminar, the USTU 1250 course. Of course, that's the English 1010 and 1011, the English Comp 1 course, and then the one with the supplemental instruction connected to it, as well as the college algebra and the intro to math course at that 1010 level. We had 78% of our faculty respond, and we were asking faculty to notify us if they noticed trends in our first-time freshman students in attendance, they were missing assignments, if they had low grades, or if they seemed to be disengaged. We had advisors out of the central advising office to connect with those students through September 29th to try to get them engaged and to do some interventions, to talk with them about campus resources, to help them with time management and study skills. We do know that in terms of overall grades, as we look across the continuum, the higher number of Fs tend to be at that lowest level. And we think part of that is because of adjustment for those students. And so we want to make sure that we get to them early. And this early alert campaign is intended to do that. So next slide. This is sort of the end of the term grades for fall 2020, this most recent semester. You'll see sort of that trend is very much the same as what we saw from the last slide. The W amount is slightly higher than last fall term, but you'll see that there is also a trend in more passing grades in terms of A's overall, with grade distribution for students from fall 19 to fall 20. So not too bad news. It seems like students have been adjusting well and still faring well as it relates to their progress in grades and in courses. So next slide. Here is what I was mentioning to you in terms of grades by classification for students. And what was remarkable is if you look at where our seniors are in terms of numbers of A's, and as they progress in terms of classification, you see progression in the amount of A's that are there. But if you look at the freshman students at the very bottom of that freshman row, that freshman column that's there, you'll see 14.2% fall 20 had a grade of F. And so that's why we do that early intervention program, is to try to get to them very soon and to make sure that we are introducing them to resources that are available on campus, because we know if we can get them to the sophomore year, their chances are they're going to do better. Senior year and junior year and then senior year, it gets them to a place where they could certainly graduate, and that is always the end goal in this. And so we put a lot of resources in what happens with freshmen for this very reason. So next slide. I wanted to mention, as the Chief Student Affairs person as well, that it has been an interesting life in student affairs, because all of the training for student affairs teaches us to make sure that we are bringing students together. And the more that we can do that, the better their chances are of making a connection. But in a COVID environment, it has been really tough. And so while we have also limited the numbers of students in classrooms, we have also been limiting some of our activities in terms of the numbers of folks that we can gather together, which is not natural, for folks in the profession. And so this gives some information about numbers for our Center for Student Wellbeing. CSW does everything from healthy living, healthy eating, to suicide prevention. And so there's a wide range of things that they do. And you'll see that the numbers of students that are participating it's down compared to the previous year. We're fall 19, spring 20 is a full year versus fall 2020. Some of those were right on task with where we were, and some we are not. And so we want to continue to do some work to push and get more students involved. And then you'll see below that the number of counseling center appointments. We have, prior to COVID, we had real issues with students and mental health. The counseling center has been a really popular place. We're happy to provide that resource to students. We were not doing much in terms of virtual counseling sessions prior to COVID. And you'll see that the virtual sessions that are available now to students, 1,256 just in fall compared to 0 for fall of 2019, shows an exponential number of folks using that resource and continuing to use it. And it will be something that we will keep as we get into a post-COVID environment. And so it does give you at least those numbers. We'll continue to push to ask students to utilize those resources, certainly virtually if they need it, and face-to-face if they would like it. And I think that's the last slide. Okay. And so I'm happy, President Simmons, to take questions. I tried to make that as painless as possible. I know that it was a lot of data at one time, but wanted to provide a range of information to give Faculty Senate an idea of how our students have performed. So I'll stop and take questions of anybody who might have questions for me.
We have questions for Dr. Freeman?
Yes, if you please. This is Ron Goulet. Charlene, I wonder if you might go back about 4 slides. It compared the final grades. That's a little too far. There we go. End of term grades. So, Yancey, has any benchmarking been made historically to look at numbers such as this to ascertain whether, hey, we're okay, we're improving, or we're not?
Yes, and so this is, we do this every year, and this was data just looking sort of at a pre-COVID and a current sort of situation, but there is data as well in terms of how students have continued to progress. And we will see that we've seen some very good metrics across our campus. There is a reason why we are doing very well in the performance funding formula for Tennessee that is measuring success outcomes around retention, progression, graduation. It is because these metrics continue to improve. Our freshman retention rate continues to improve. This past year, the cohort was 77%. That rate from first year to second year was 77%. I will say that it's getting better, but there's so much more work to do. I hope I'm answering your question or getting at what you're asking. It is improving, but there is more to be done.
Well, just my only perspective is looking at the progress that my particular class is making, so I don't get the universal view that you get, and the idea of retention. I don't see that. I just see the final grades, and I can count how many Fs I have compared to previous years. But the retention is a real important indicator, I gather. When you're looking at the whole forest. So I'm glad to see these. I'm glad to see these numbers, because my personal or my anecdotal data point has had me worried. That's all.
Yeah, I understand, and there may be pockets of information out there and situations where we need to focus more attention. We've done more in terms of supplemental instruction to help with DFW courses for faculty who want a SI leader in their classes. So we've tried to extend and do more of those sorts of things. We have online tutoring that's there and available. And so we try to provide as many resources as we can. sometimes students will take us up on those resources and sometimes they will not. And so it, you know, if they decide not to, then it makes it a lot more difficult for them to have some success. Some of the early reporting from faculty when they see students are struggling, in particular in the freshman year, is extremely helpful for us because it allows us to do an intervention. I know Stacy Grisham is on the call, and I will say that when those midterm grades go in particular for freshman students, we pull a list and we go back and look to determine which students are struggling, and then we begin communicating with them about what it takes to be successful. And so the more we can get faculty to help us in that regard, the better it will be for us doing an intervention and trying to be creative and helping them to get back on track.
One more question. I don't want to dominate this. I looked recently at the courses that fall under the SI. I saw math and some chemistry, but no particular freshman level engineering courses. Is there a critical mass that's involved in setting one up?
Yeah, I know Stacy's on the call. I'm going to ask her to unmute because she is responsible for, you know, the creation of some of the SI stuff that's there. I know we are looking at DFW rates in particular for courses. And then if I'm not mistaken, I think they are allowing faculty members who would like an SI leader to, you know, have an SI leader in their class. In particular, if it's one of those courses, one of those STEM major courses where we know the courses tend to be a lot more difficult. And so, you know, we might be able to work with you to create something if you have a particular class. Stacy, don't let me say something out of turn if this is not correct.
No, Yancey, you're correct. We look at DFW rates and the number of total students enrolled. So we do target some of the higher enrolled courses first, but we are always trying to grow the SI program. Would be happy to partner with you if we notice some particular courses that could benefit from it. I would say just reach out to me and or Dr. Freeman, and we'll get you connected with the department to start exploring how to get an SI leader added. Okay, thank you very much.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw an article several months ago that that stated that if you look across the board, across many universities, when many programs went online, they saw a tick, an uptick in student performance. So I wonder whether you accounted for that in this as well.
That's
because of online exams.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I haven't studied it and reviewed anything. I don't know, Dr. Matthews, if you've seen anything, Dr. Marlowe, if you've seen anything to support or you know, reject that theory that that course grades went up because of online instruction. It's really weird. I know in terms of looking at demand for UTC, we had a number of students in the fall say, oh my gosh, I want face-to-face courses. I want more face-to-face courses. I want more face-to-face courses. And then we didn't have as many. And then in the spring, they came back and said, oh my gosh, I want more online courses. I want more, you know, and so, I don't know the answer to that question, but I don't, Matt, Sherry, do you guys know, or do you have a response for that?
Yancy, I think that would be a really hard question for us to answer because we don't know. Online tests were given, online instruction used a variety of different ways to test students. We don't have a way to single out, I think, how they were tested and whether the online testing environment figured into their grade. Certainly don't have that, I don't think, for spring because of the change in modality. And I don't know that we're going to have it for fall either because we give faculty a lot of freedom to evaluate students the way they want. While I have the mic, if I may, I just wanted to mention one thing, and I apologize, Yancey, if you said this and I missed it, but we did see an increase in W grades, I believe, in the data. But I think it's worth pointing out that we also moved the W date later in all of the terms that were spring 2020 and later. So there is a bigger window for students to choose to take a W. And I think that is going to lead to a natural increase in W grades by itself, irrespective of how the semester was delivered. The other thing is I do want to add to what Yancey said about early alerts and midterm grades. We've been pushing hard to get faculty to engage with those when we can. And I think that the results from the fall were promising. I hope folks will continue to engage with that. And we've done better just about every term in terms of getting midterm grades in. The ones that are not reported, in the slide that showed not reported, you saw a decrease. We'd like to get that even lower as we go forward.
Donald has his hand up, so he gets the next question.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions, I guess. I'm gonna try to do this the best I can. So one is not the first one is not a question. Can we get more information of what the SI leader is, what they do, how they're actually gonna interface and help faculty if they're in the classroom? Because I know that there's probably courses that, like Ron said, in engineering, that this may be a useful tool or person to have access to.
Yeah. And can I, before you go on, I want to make sure that I say that we do work with the departments to select SI leaders. It's usually a person who's an upperclassman in the same major. And we oftentimes will ask the faculty member, are you aware of the student? Do you know the student? Do you have anyone you'd like to recommend? So that there is some synergy between the faculty member and the student. And as they are covering information, they're doing it as the faculty member would, and not deflecting from what's there. So I think there is a lot of value, in particular when you have one for your course or set of courses around that SI leader partnership.
And the other question I have is around the DFW rates as a whole. Is there any tracking of transfer students coming in versus students that are come in from freshman year up? I know in the case of electrical engineering, we get a lot of students that transfer and start, from, like Chat State, and they come in and they'll join us in junior year. In the past, like I'll give you a case, electric circuits 1 and 2 is taught at Chat State, but it's also taught here. So a lot of students who are transferring in already had circuits 1 and circuits 2. Our department worked with Chat State to make sure they were teaching from the same text, they were teaching from the same material. So when they came in, whether they only had circuits 1 or they had both circuits 1 and circuits 2, they had the requisite knowledge for the courses that followed on to be prepared and be successful in those courses. And so I wonder if we have students coming in from other places, like say Dalton State or other universities or colleges, is there a correlation between like a particular transfer, school coming in versus others in terms of DFW rates? Because that may be indicative of something else in a misalignment in how well they're prepared to take our courses.
That sounds like a wonderful question for Dr. Marlowe in institutional research, who, if she's not looked at it, she could probably go back and take a look. Sherry, you better unmute yourself before I promise something you can't deliver.
Well, I appreciate you not promising things that I may or may not be able to deliver, Dr. Freeman, but we haven't specifically looked at that instance of transfer students. Usually on our fact book, we do break it down by college and subject to provide a little bit more narrative and context for the DFW rates. And as I'm sure we know, there's so many factors that go into what could impact a student withdrawing from a course. But if that's something that you're interested in, just go ahead and shoot me an email and we can meet and talk about it a little bit more in detail.
Sure. And the one final question I have is, does DFW's, when you're looking at changing of majors, does that factor in at all with these rates, or is it's just looking at a given snapshot of a course in a given semester?
It's really just looking at that snapshot for the course and term.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all I have. Appreciate it.
Other questions for Dr. Freeman?
Yeah, Dr. Freeman, this is Marisa. I have a question. Your course completion data, I'm assuming, is coming from a time once incompletes are taken care of. Did you see any changes in the proportion of incompletes in the pandemic environment? Kind of gives some insight perhaps to faculty load changes as a result.
Yeah, not especially large increase in the number of students who took incompletes in courses. We also, I think, made an adjustment for when incompletes had to be done as well back in spring 20, that I think helped students overall, because we backed it up to the last day of the term, you know, versus somewhere about 3/4 of the way through the term. And so I think that helped some of this. And so I think by maneuvering some of our process, it may help us to, you know, eliminate some of the incompletes that we would have had overall, but we didn't see a marked increase in incompletes, you know, during the same time.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, if there are no other questions, we'll move on. Matt Matthews will be presenting about the UT Online Consortium.
Thank you, Charlene. So we have been working with a steering committee at the system level on this initiative, and they had suggested that we might want to make sure that our campuses knew about the initiative. So we chose to present to Faculty Senate. This is part of President Boyd's One UT initiative, and in a nutshell, it's a consortium to share existing online courses amongst the 4 campuses: UT Chattanooga, UT Health Sciences, UT Knoxville, and UT Martin. The group that is heading it up, arranging the meetings, and making sure that the work moves forward is Vice President Linda Martin's office. We have a steering committee that has about 4 to 6 members from each campus. The committee was appointed by President Randy Boyd. We have representatives from our campus appointed by the recommended by the Chancellor and the Provost. Vice Chancellor Vicki Farnsworth, Assistant Provost Dawn Ford, Professor and Director of Gen Ed Lauren Ingram, myself, Emily Thompson from Library, and Joel Wells, our University Registrar. And that roughly parallels the membership from the other campuses. I think some of those folks will also be on the call today, so if you want to ask questions of them, they may be able to help out. I would say that we see this as a way to expand the courses that are available to all students within the UT system. There are courses that we offer that other campuses may not, and vice versa. They may offer things that we don't that would be advantageous for our students. We would like to make this a system that's fairly straightforward for students, so they would pay the costs at their main campus. If there's a course that is in the system that you would like to take at, say, Knoxville, you would be able to enroll in it, and Knoxville's offering it as part of the consortium. Our UT Chattanooga student could pay to take the course as if it were a UTC course, but it would be delivered by someone at UT Knoxville. We would have the credit come directly to their local transcript, so it doesn't require being a transfer student. The goal here would be to expand the enrollments in our courses. So if you have online courses that have open seats, you would have an opportunity to fill those open seats with students from other campuses. And I would mention that one of the things that has been mentioned is to offer incentive opportunities when the money from the extra students comes back to the campus. There's even been mention of offering incentives to the department or to the specific faculty member. That would all be a local governance issue, but it has at least been raised. We're partnering with a company called Higher Learning Partners. It is run by Regis University, which is in Colorado. They have 30 years of experience running a system like this, and they are only here to facilitate the consortium part. They are not involved in the academics. So they are here to help us run the back end. They are not here to offer courses. They are not here to offer faculty. None of that. That will all be our business here. There's a lot of work ahead. Here's a sort of outline of what the steering committee, and there will be various subcommittees have been asked to do. Identify any issues, for example, with governance. Are there things that need to be worked out between the campuses? There will be coordination issues like timing of courses, timing of payment, and so forth. There are a lot of technology issues. You saw Vice Chancellor Farnsworth was on the group. We have a number of systems that will need to work together. To answer one of the obvious questions that comes up when we discuss this, if a student from Knoxville would like to enroll in a UT Chattanooga course, they will have to get a login to our Canvas system, so that we will not be required to put the course in their instance of Canvas. Rather, they would have to get a login to get into our instance of Canvas. So there are a lot of issues like that you can imagine have to be worked out. The steering committee's mission is to provide recommendations for what the implementation of the consortium will look like. We are recruiting local campus partners as well as looking for courses to offer. We will start probably with Gen Ed, that's the expectation, and expand from there. I believe the focus initially is on undergraduate, but it's certainly the case that graduate could be considered. And I want to make sure everyone understands that faculty input will be key here. So we are not looking to impose something on faculty, but rather to find partners who would like to help us build this, including partners among the faculty. One of the things that comes up is, will my course be taught by another campus and therefore I won't have an opportunity to teach it here? That's one of the governance issues, the coordination issues that we would need to work out, but it has been stated as a principle for our implementation that each campus will get to determine what courses it offers to the other campuses and what courses from other campuses can be offered to our local students. So I don't believe that one of the concerns that I think naturally would come up, namely that we would be competing with each other for our courses, we will have a say in that. We will not have courses forced upon us, or at least that's the principle where we are now. I don't see that changing, just to say that that was the way it was stated to start with. We are expected to provide a report back to the president by summer with a presentation on implementation that would happen in the October 2021 Board of Trustees meeting. I believe that's it, Charlene. I'd be happy to take questions, and I saw Emily shout out, she's here. I think Lauren was here earlier. Be happy to answer. I think maybe Joel is also here. He was at one point. I can't see anybody else, Dawn or Vicky.
So questions for Dr. Matthews? I see Julia has her hand up. I think Julia disappeared. So does somebody else have a question?
I was still muted. I'm an idiot. I have two small questions and the answer may be yet to be determined. But my first one is, you had said something about students can take courses at other campuses that are not being offered at their campus. How will it be determined, like how close a match is it? I mean, I'm thinking about in my department, I know, for example, like there are some courses that are very straightforward, like it is the same everywhere else, but there are topics courses, there are things like that. So I'm curious about how that would be determined. And the second would be priority registration. Will home campus students have priority in classes before students from other campuses are permitted to enroll? So those are my two questions that come up right away. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're right, Julia. Those are going to be determined. But I think that this is the kind of thing where the chief academic officers, the provosts at each respective campus, will want to have a say in how that would be implemented. So even if the steering committee comes back with certain recommendations, I would expect that the chief academic officers at each campus would be able to have input on the final say on that. Maybe someone else from the steering committee remembers additional.
Yeah, sorry. I went to they actually had a demo of the system of how it works from the background. And the key to remember it is that all of this is really focused on choice, and there's a lot of choice in the professor who's teaching it. So like figuring out how cross-listing happens, that's going to be a thing. But basically there's going to be kind of like another catalog that the students have access to when they're registering. So they've got their UTC classes, and then they have the UT online classes. And the professor who's teaching will have to choose to open seats on UT online. So it won't be just like, if you have 15 seats in a class and you say, well, I'm open to UT online, and all of a sudden it's all people who don't go to UTC. That's not a thing that should happen intentionally, or that shouldn't happen accidentally. It might happen intentionally. They are hoping at some point to have specific UT online classes, but that's like a ways down the road after we figure this out. But it is a way that, like, if you have 15 seats in the class and you've only got 4 students from UTC who are taking it, and it's a really cool class, you would have the option to put it up on UT online and have other students help you make numbers. It works really well. The back thing is, it's kind of a lot easier than I thought it would be. And a lot of the work's going to be on the registrar. It's just getting it set up. Does that make sense?
I just want to add something from a shared governance perspective, because this has been discussed several times at UFC, and the members of the UFC, which is the University Faculty Council, which is the faculty representatives of the 4 campuses coming together. And we're going to continue discussing this topic and continue asking for clarity. But one of the things that Linda Martin, who is the vice president or chief academic officer, basically the provost of the whole system, has assured us, and we will hold her to it, is that all classes will go through curriculum reviews. So UTC so if UTK puts a class out on UT Online and UTC wants to accept it, UTC's curriculum committee will have to review it and approve it. So there will actually be a number at UTC. It's not like our transfer equivalency agreements that we have with the TBR schools. It's in fact, it would be the classes at Knoxville. We would like it to be part of our curriculum. We review it and then add it to a catalog. And so, you know, we have,
yes.
we at UFC have questions about how is that going to happen, and how are we going to process so many curriculum proposals. Now, they said they're going to start, whenever they start, with classes that we already have matched. So there are some classes that are already matched across the system. And so they'll kind of start with those. But I agree, I will say that at least right now, the makeup of UFC is one in which it's advocating for each campus will get control over which classes will go into the system. So UTC would get control of saying, these are the ones we're going to put in. And then we would have control over saying, these are the ones we will accept from the other campuses.
Yes. So when I said that there's like this magic other catalog, the students may not be able to see every class that exists in it. If there's a UT Health and Sciences class that we haven't accepted here, they just won't see it. The program from Regis is pretty slick. And so that's the magic sauce that is going to make it work, is this partnership with Regis University from all of the paperwork.
Emily, can you clarify again, what is Regis doing with this initiative? And is it just to consult as it's being implemented, or is it like ongoing?
They're consulting, and they're providing the platform, which Joel may know more about because it's going to affect him the most. But it's a platform that they have developed and have used with a large number of other universities. I can't remember how many other universities are using variations of this, but it's the platform
that students are selecting the courses from, or taking the courses on the platform.
The platform will, they'll take the courses on, if they're taking a course at UTC, they will take it on UTC's Canvas.
Right.
And they'll have their own login to that. So it's the platform that helps a UTK student registering for a class at UTC. The Regis platform helps that request get to UTC so that UTC can approve it and it gets into the student's transcript.
Okay.
Yeah.
Charlie,
we have
they run consortia for other universities, other systems.
Okay.
So that's not a product they're creating for us. It's a product.
Right.
we have,
Okay.
and we are utilizing. I mean, we have different instances of Banner and Canvas. I think
Right. Okay.
described it as right. They're providing the go-between between our different campus systems. That's it.
Okay.
We have multiple hands up, so I'm going to take them in the order that I see them. Alex Zellin.
So I have, I guess, a few questions. The first thing, and especially from being on curriculum committee within my department, is what exactly does that look like for us with regards to suddenly they can take, another psychology class at another department, and then do we have to approve that for like I know you said the curriculum department has to approve it, but is that now suddenly we have to provide overrides for majors and minors and concentrations and all that other stuff that goes along with it? And then another question is related to, will this come down to deleting faculty positions, in all honesty? Because for instance, if UTK and they have a bunch of graduate students teaching these intro level classes with a bunch of seats open, does that mean we've suddenly lost lines for lecturers and tenure track faculty and tenured faculty? What is the rollover impact on the number of faculty in our departments, and how do we keep this from, or even potentially from, becoming like a power grab of who's taking what students and where and when?
All good questions, Alex. Let me say, I think on the first part, where the classes go in your curriculum, I believe that's a local governance issue for you guys. In terms of faculty positions, let me offer a slightly different perspective. One of the examples that I've considered that might make sense for this system is the music program here, which actually I talked with them, I believe, over a year ago about the possibility of this kind of system. At that time, it was just an idea that was being tossed around. And the faculty in the music program said, do you mean that this would be a way that we could offer the courses that are needed to reactivate our Masters of Music without having to hire the faculty here to do it? And I said, well, that's at least theoretically possible. That if the music theory course that you don't necessarily have a faculty member for here is something offered at one of the other campuses, you may be able to reactivate your master's because you're able to access that course at another campus. Another example of that would be, I don't believe that Martin has a major in physics, but they do have a minor. And this would be a way that we may be able to expand the enrollments in our own physics courses by offering courses that their own students at Martin might want to expand on their minor. Who knows, maybe they could even begin to build a major if we were able to help them bootstrap that. I think that those two examples are instructive of how we might benefit from classes at another place and how we might offer classes somewhere else. And in both cases, we may be able to keep or even add faculty positions here, not in one area, or not necessarily lose them because of the reasons you've mentioned, but we might be able to expand what we have here. Now, as far as adding and removing faculty, I'll point out Jerry Hale just activated his microphone, and he's the man that makes those decisions.
Wow, you have eyes like an eagle. Man, I didn't know you were going to notice that as soon as I unmuted myself. Unless things have changed, and I have stepped away from those meetings since giving recommendations about who from our campus should be part of that steering committee. But the idea was that our students would only be able to go to those other campuses to take classes if there were not seats available for them in our own sections of those classes here. And so all three campuses were very protective of their own faculty, and to make sure that the kinds of things that you mentioned, which would be very real concerns, are not going to be realized. Now, I don't know if that's changed or not, but that's at least where the parameters for all of this began.
So Matt, I like the idea that we could potentially expand, but I'm even curious about what the trickle down effect looks like. You know, maybe we offer a degree to UT Martin from, as you said, they only have a minor, we could offer a major, but you know, even within our own departments and concentrations, we have to be careful about which other classes and other departments we recommend students to take, because we can't overwhelm those classes either. So you know, it also depends on all these classes being offered online, which I know during COVID is real easy, right? A lot of us are teaching online. But even after COVID ends, what is the anticipation of, are we expecting that a lot of our classes are going to remain online? Because as of now, does that seem like it's the only way it's going to work? But even then, are there going to be the overloads that are going to come with it? So just trying to, you know, think about from the faculty perspective of hearing that, oh, we can outsource to other campuses, is like, oh, I'm losing my job, or, you know, we might make things more difficult for departments than we anticipate.
Alex, I understand. I would just point out, there's no question we're changing the economic incentives around offering courses online, because we're changing how the money would be distributed, who can earn the money. That's all going to be true. I have no idea how that's going to change people's behavior, but we do know that when you change those rules, you change people's behavior. I wouldn't be able to predict what it's going to look like.
Julia Kaminsky has her hand up.
Thanks. This isn't so much a question as something that I would like to table for the committee to keep in mind as it's moving forward. I know in courses where we already have multiple sections, and this may be obviated if what the provost said about not making students fill available seats on campus first, but you know, we're already seeing instances of professor shopping based on rate my professor reviews, and based, we know from data, largely on sex and ethnicity. And I do worry that this could exacerbate some of those trends. And so I hope that the committee will keep that in mind as something that may not be obviously related to this, but where this could have a real impact on the way that we're able to recruit, support, and retain a diverse faculty, which we know has great benefits.
That's a good point, Julia. You're exactly right about how students may make decisions or evaluate faculty based on those factors. You're exactly right.
Michelle Regular has her hand up.
Hi, Dr. Matthews. Thanks for letting me join, by the way. But I just have a quick reminder to also consider in the conversation things that happen outside the classroom. So like, for instance, which office would manage any academic integrity issues, or the provision and implementation of accommodations? Would that be the home institution? Would that be the other institution? So just some things to think about as you're having conversations.
Very good point. My hope is that having Joel on the representatives from UTC will make sure that those other support areas that perhaps I don't see every day, but he is in touch with, his presence will help make sure we get those covered. But I think even accommodations for your own office, very important that we get those right for students that may be coming from a distant campus.
Other questions? Thank you very much, Dr. Matthews. We're going to move on to a few items of new business. At the end of last semester, there were some faculty concerns brought up about diversity in academic leadership appointments, particularly related to interim appointments. So I had put in a request with OPAIR to run some data, and so they presented that data to us. The report is on the Faculty Senate website. I'm just going to present it as informational item right now, and then we can have a discussion about it. If you look at what I had asked for was interim leadership appointments in the academic side of the house. They gave us additional information. So the next two graphs were like they did it on their own. But so we asked essentially for breakdowns by race and gender, for central leadership, which would be chancellor, provost, associate provost type level, and then college leadership, the deans and the associate deans, assistant deans, then you get department heads, and then you get the total. And I think it's pretty clear by the numbers, we haven't had a very diverse body of appointees. And we have significant problems with race and ethnicity. They also ran a search of charts to see, is there a change when we get to the permanent? So then they ran these are permanent appointments. You can see a slight improvement. I still think they're quite low. And these again were academic appointments, and then they ran a chart for non-academic appointments. Of course, there's a large part of the university that is not under academic affairs. So I will say that this report has been shared with leadership. The Faculty Senate Executive Committee has met with the Provost and the Chancellor and begun discussions around this topic. I believe the Commission on the Status of Women, I know they sent a letter. I believe they have either already met or will be meeting with the Chancellor to discuss this topic. It's definitely something that needs to be addressed. So I provide that as information, and I'll open the floor for any discussion. I see Charlie has risen his hand.
Yeah, first time I've thought to use that. Yeah, so I just have some concerns about recent permanent executive leadership appointments that have happened seemingly, to my knowledge, without any competitive searches, either externally or internally. And I guess I would like to have some more transparency from the executive leadership team about why these were not competitive searches and what procedures were followed. And is that something that is being consistently applied to all units on campus, or is there maybe more exemptions are allowed because it's at a certain level? But I just, it just doesn't look good to me. It doesn't, and this is nothing to do with the individuals in the positions. I honestly don't know them personally, but the process or lack thereof just really concerns me.
Is there anybody on the call that wants to respond? Okay, so Charlie, I'll say that we will bring this up at the next time that the executive committee gets to speak with the chancellor and the provost next month.
Thank you.
See, Ron Goulet has his hand up. You're muted.
Thank you, Charlene. I noticed the data was collected from 017 to 020. Is there some reason why? Oh, I see. That's 011. Okay.
So, I had asked for so I asked for the interims for a decade, and they can only get data from 2011 to 2020. So it's just shy of a decade.
Okay.
Then they added on the extra ones, and I guess they could only do 3 years of that last graph. So they did as many years as they had data for.
Okay. And then I just wanted to echo Charlie's concerns. Thank you.
Other comments, discussion? Okay, I will say that this is an issue the Senate Executive Committee will continue to discuss, and of course we welcome any ideas, motions, etc. now or at future meetings. You know, I personally would like to see some kind of policy or procedure put in place to ensure diversity in interim appointments. For me, the interim appointments are key because it's the foot in the door to move up. And if we don't have diversity in the interims, we're not going to have much diversity at the permanent positions. And so I will continue to advocate for that, but I'm just one person with one idea. I welcome people to send me or others, there's a Commission on Status of Women, ideas about how we can advocate for some kind of change so these numbers increase.
Maybe we need to look at how interims are selected. Maybe the process that interims are being selected needs to be changed. Maybe it needs to be, you know, we go through a search committee for hiring of a permanent position. And I'm not saying we go through a full search for an interim, but maybe we should be looking at something like that, where it's not just somebody reaching down and picking somebody and saying, this is the person I'm going to put in this interim position, but maybe it should be a search committee, or maybe after the selection's made, there should be some kind of review to ensure that that is the best person for that position. Just some of my thoughts, but because I agree, I see these numbers and they're very disturbing. I think it's very bad.
I think another.
I was just going to clarify, my concerns were also with the permanent appointments as well, the recent permanent executive leadership appointments.
Yeah, I got that, Charlie. Julia, I think you were about to say something.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think that the focus on interims is a really good way into thinking about the permanent. I do think that the immediate response back is going to be interims are urgent, right, and time sensitive. So maybe there's something about somebody being in an interim not being eligible for, I mean, I think that there are ways to interrupt the chain between an informal, not transparent interim search and a permanent appointment. And so I think we should be open to thinking creatively about the many different ways that that pipeline doesn't continue going in the same direction it has always gone.
Julia, sorry, Charlene, if I can add in terms of the urgency of interims, you know, I think if we want to get things done, we can get them done. We can get them done timely and quickly. I think it's a matter of want and desire to make that happen in a rapid process. You know, I've been served on ad hoc committees that we've been expedited through to review something or to carry out an investigation or whatever that is. So I think this can be done. It's just the willingness and the desire to do so and coming up with a process to do it.
I think that's true.
I agree, and Julia, it's something to think about. I will say, so we also belong to TUS, which is Tennessee University Faculty Senate. We began discussing this topic in December. We plan to revisit it when we meet again this spring. What was interesting was Tennessee Tech asked a question. They said, how many of you are using that procedure of you can be an interim, but you can't apply for the permanent job? Is your campus doing that? And I've heard of it occasionally here at UTC in the past. TTU had concerns about it because at Tennessee Tech, it appears that it's the female candidates that are told they can only be interims and can never apply for the permanent jobs. And yet the male candidates seem to be allowed to apply for the permanent job. So, you know, every solution has there's pros and cons. So it's something to take into account.
The other thing I think with limiting someone who's an interim from not applying to permanent is it could potentially have someone who's interested in being permanent not taking the interim, and they could be the best qualified person to fill that role. And thus you run the risk of, you know, not having someone who is qualified doing that job because they fear that they won't be allowed to apply for the permanent position.
Yeah, and I should say all this is really interesting and a reason that off the cuff remarks shouldn't turn into policy. But I guess I think it's really helpful to have a conversation about different ways. And I saw somebody put in the chat, you know, making it more clear to people how to be eligible to be an interim. Maybe there's a pool of people that have expressed interest in administrative positions who would like to be considered for interims. So I think that we need to, I just think it's helpful to be prepared with a number of different solutions that solve different aspects of the problem. But yeah, thank you. That's really interesting information.
Can I add, I was trying to raise my hand. Sorry, this is Katie Gone. One of the things that I think would be interesting too is just the idea of transparency all around in the decision-making processes. So when we do have exemptions to appoint to positions, what are those? We don't ever see what those are necessarily. And I think that a lot of times just having the information helps alleviate concerns, right? So maybe there's some kind of, you know, transparent documentation with position descriptions and qualifications and those sorts of things that can help in some of these situations as well.
Okay, any other thoughts or discussion?
Charlene, I was going back and forth with Matt. It just seems that just looking at this chart alone, we can all agree that these aren't acceptable numbers.
but I feel like it's not the whole picture. Like if we were to understand what the pools look like, and if the pools don't represent diversity, then that may lead us to where we direct our efforts, or if they do reflect diversity and these decisions are still being made to reflect this chart, then that's a whole other set of issues. So how could we complete the picture of and really understand the data?
Agreed. And during our conversation with the chancellor and provost, we talked about, often these positions need you to be a full professor, and our full professor ranks aren't very diverse. And so the problem is complex, and we really need to work on increasing the diversity in the full professors. So making sure that associate professors have the resources to make the promotional jump, so that, because historically women and faculty of color often carry heavy teaching loads and service loads. And so how can we find the balance so that there is a greater pool? Because often that is one of the problems, if they limit it to full professors and you're in a department where all the full professors are white males, the interim's going to be a white male. Any other final thoughts?
I do have one in terms of permanent positions. I've served on search committees for hiring of new faculty. And one thing, maybe of value is to make it blind, in sense of that we do our best to remove things like names. And so you're only looking at qualifications of the individuals when you're evaluating them. Of course, when you go to an on-campus interview or an interview, that will be lifted. But at that point, you've really focused on more the qualifications of the individuals that are applying for the position, and less on what might be inherent subconscious biases that maybe deter selecting or cause people to score people differently. We see it with course evaluations, right? I've been in numerous faculty senate meetings where I've had Dr. Claire McCullough, who is retired now, but brought up the fact that women and minorities receive some of the poorest course evaluations, regardless of how well they teach the course compared to their male counterparts and white counterparts. So I think we should look at that as possible way of helping to maybe address this lack of diversity in the permanent positions as well.
Yeah. Other thoughts, anything? Okay. This is a quick, I think I skipped over one. Quick informational item. So I did post, so it goes into the archive. I did post the results from our recent faculty survey, and I think everyone who participated, we sent it out in December, put a very quick turnaround on it. But it was a survey about kind of the start of the spring semester and COVID-19 and kind of levels of perceived safety, and then some questions about the fall. The survey was circulated to the executive leadership team during the discussions about how to handle the start of the spring semester. And of course, it also includes information about the fall. I also provided to the UFC, the University Faculty Councils, and in turn, it somehow got to the president of the system. So we will continue to use the information, particularly the information now that spring has started, the information about the fall as we move forward with what is the fall going to look like? And so at least we have some information about faculty's desires about the fall. I skipped one, I don't have a slide for it, but another informational item. So I had also posted on the Senate webpage, the Faculty Senate Executive Committee is putting together a tip sheet. Right now we're calling it Documenting COVID-19's Impact in Your EDOs. And our thought is, we need to do a really good job this year and in future years of documenting how COVID-19 has impacted all different aspects of our job performance. So teaching, research, service. And so we've been putting together a document that just is a series of tips. Things like we need to rewind the clock and actually think about what happened in the spring, because we had all done our EDOs before the pandemic hit. So we need to report out what we had to do in the spring semester to change teaching, as well as all the way through to today. So I encourage you all to look at the document. It's a work in progress. Please, I think you should be able to add comments right there. So if you want to add tips in the document, you should be able to. If you can't, or you want to do it offline, you can just send me an email with additional tips. Our goal is to finalize a tip sheet by the end of the month and then send it out to all faculty as we begin to do our EDOs. Okay, and then our last item of new business. So the UFC is a venue where we get to kind of communicate as faculty senates and share what we're doing and also seek others to kind of join us in our efforts. So at the end of last semester, the UTK, UTIA, that's the UT Institutes of Agriculture, so they're combined now as a faculty. Their Senate passed a resolution, and the full resolution's on the webpage. I just put up the last bit, which is the key there. Therefore, this is what we've resolved. This is, I mean, when UTK talks about this resolution, they'll say this is not directly about President Boyd, but this does come out of the recent process by which President Boyd was selected as the permanent president of the UT system. And so if you're unfamiliar, President Boyd was appointed as an interim, and he served in the interim position for 2 or so years. And then this past spring, the board decided to move forward with appointing him permanently. He did do a tour of campuses. He came here to UTC, then the pandemic hit. So I think he did the rest of the tour virtually. And then he was made president, but there was not a national search. And so essentially UTK has put through a resolution calling on the Board of Trustees to amend its bylaws to ensure in the future there'll be rigorous, open, inclusive search processes for a president. So I bring this forward, one, as an informational item, so we know what UTK, UTI is up to, but also 2, to ask you all, what would you like to do? Would you like to endorse their resolution? Would you like to pass a similar resolution, or would you prefer to do nothing, or suggest another possible way we could go forward?
I do think it's kind of bad that they didn't do a national search on such a high profile position. I mean, come on. You're in charge of an entire system, president of an entire system, and you don't compete that? I mean, I don't know. I kind of agree with their position here and what they've written in the resolution. So I'm at minimum, I'm kind of for adopting it or supporting the resolution.
Other thoughts, discussion?
I second that. I guess, you know, the question I would have would be, you know, which comes off more stronger, right? Does adopting the, you know, the supporting it, or adopting our own type of resolution send a stronger type of message? And what type of messages would we like to send out to, you know, to the board, right? And so I think just kind of figuring out like, what is this, you know, I feel like agreeing with one thing and then coming up with your own statements is 2 different levels of push. And what level of push do we wish to kind of showcase, I guess?
Yeah, I think, you know, if we were to pass the same resolution where everywhere it says UTKIA, UTIA, it says UTC, and then provide that to UFC, you know, then when it goes to the board, you have 2 campuses basically saying the same thing. And I think that's really what UTK is looking for, is to get a partner to stand by them. So I guess I'll ask, oh.
Sorry, Lane, I didn't mean to step on you there.
I was gonna ask, do we have a motion to pass the same resolution with UTC substituted everywhere it says UTK, or are there other similar motions?
I would move that we adopt it with UTC replacing UTK.
I'll second.
All right, fabulous. So I'm just making my notes so we get this all down. So if you pull it, I don't have the full resolution on the screen, but you can pull it up on your own computer. It's linked to from the Senate. And it gives you all the like background, right? The all whereas, and then we get to the key thereof. And so the motion is we'll change the wording. So everywhere it says UTK, UTI Faculty Senate, it will now say for us UTC Faculty Senate, but the rest of it will remain the same. We have a first and second. Any discussion?
Yeah, what was the reasoning that Randy Boyd got the job? I mean, I understand the interim aspect, but why was he appointed for the next 5 years? What was what's the
I can
backstory
address
there?
what was said to the UFC, Charlene, because I was, you weren't, and I don't know if Jamie, aren't you here? Jamie Harvey is here. She was earlier. Part of the conversation that happened, and the board did come and talk to us. The head of the board came and talked to the UFC a number of times, also talked with all the chancellors. Part of the rationale was at a time of massive change of leadership in the UT system and at Knoxville, that the success that Mr. Boyd was having and the request not to put UT into a vacuum of leadership again. We were getting close to the end of that interim position, and the board felt very strongly that they wanted a continuation of that. And so that was a lot of the rationale that they brought forward. And, you know, I'll be honest, at the time, it really did make a lot of sense. Dr. DiPietro left a little faster than anyone thought he was going to, and Mr. Boyd was able to step in. He jokes about it that he didn't get the other job that he thought he wanted, and he ended up getting the job that he thinks is the best job he's had in his life. So that was a lot of the rationale for that. The board does not have the restriction, and that's the reason that UTK and UTIA have written this, is the board bylaws do not state that the presidential search must be done out there in a big nationwide search. And so that's why they're requesting that the bylaws be revised. I don't know if that helps or not, but that is a little bit of the rationale that went behind.
So do they have a rule on how long you can be interim?
I am not aware of one in the bylaws. I'll certainly be glad to look that up in the bylaws and share that back with this body.
Because I kind of get the sense that people were pretty happy with Randy Boyd, and if you could keep him on kind of in an interim fashion for a longer period of time, then let's do it. I don't know if that would be true in the future, but it seems like it was definitely the case now. I mean, I guess the fear is that there's some shenanigans going on, but it doesn't sound like that was the case this time.
I've been frustrated though. I mean, I don't think you want a president who's endlessly interim. That doesn't put him in a position of strength to or her to make necessary changes. I've seen, I think, sometimes UTC have department heads that were interim for far too long. That probably solved a problem in that the salary is lower, one guesses, for an interim department head than it is for a full-time hired department head. So there are salary pressures and other reasons why it might be to their advantage to have somebody interim for a long time that I don't think are healthy. I certainly have approved the resolution. I think it's they had plenty of time to do a full search, it would seem like.
I'm going to post a link to the board bylaws, and I'm going to just go ahead and tell you that it's on page 17. The information about the appointment and selection of the president is on page 17. I'll just post that in the chat. And there is not a limit on the how long the interim. There is a statement that says when the board deems it's appropriate to fill, then they can move forward. So just 1 second, I will post the bylaws just so everybody has them.
Okay, Ron Goulet has his hand.
Thank you. The motion is to basically adopt the resolution and just replace UTC where we have UTK. I would encourage reviewing the document carefully. There is reference in the resolution about adhering to the principles of shared governance as reflected in our faculty handbook, section 1.7. Well, we don't have a section 1.7, and I think most mention of shared governance has disappeared from our faculty handbook. So just we could just touch it up to eliminate that inconsistency.
So I see, I mean, we could either delete that whereas altogether, or we could stop it at we are committed to uphold and expect adherence to the principle of shared governance.
I think that would be fine, and just remove the reference to the handbook.
Okay, so if you're reading the full resolution, it's the paragraph that says, whereas we commit to uphold and expect adherence to the principle of shared governance. And what we'll do is add a period there and delete the rest of that sentence. Anybody object to that?
Charlene, I don't want to object, but I would say we do have a 1.4 that goes on for a couple of pages about shared governance.
So would we rather just substitute 1.7 for 1.4? Are you okay with that, Ron?
I believe so.
Okay. So we'll update the number because yeah, we do have different handbooks, so the numbers are slightly off. Any other thoughts, discussion? Okay, then we'll do, we had a first and a second. So if there's no more discussion, we'll do a roll call vote. I'll do it like I did last time. I'll call out your name. We'll do the officers first just because they're top of my list, and then we'll go alphabetically by your first name. So Tammy Garland.
Yes.
Jamie Harvey. Alexander Zellin.
Yes.
Ann Sweetberg.
Yes.
Barry Camrith.
Yes.
Bernadette Dupre.
Yes.
Beth Crawford.
Abstain.
Brian Rogers.
Yes.
Chandra Ward. Charlotte left. Chris Stewart.
Yes.
David Giles.
Yes.
Donald Reesing.
Yes.
Eleni Penton-Gatto.
Yes.
Erica Schaefer. Ethan's not here. Is Hill Craddock here? Ignatius.
Yes.
Irina.
Yes.
Jacqueline Michael. Is Jacqueline here? Okay, moving on. Joni Jackson.
Yes.
Jody Kasky. Joshua Hamblin.
Whatever.
Yes.
Oh, did I skip Jody? Sorry, was she coming back on?
I voted yes.
Okay, thanks. And then Joshua Hamlin. Julia Kaminsky.
Yes.
Lanny Gao. Liz Hathaway.
Yes.
Marissa Colston.
Yes.
Ming Zhangji. Natalie Ownsley.
Yes.
Nicholas Bohr.
Yes.
Phil Roundy.
Yes.
Priscilla Sims Robertson. Priscilla. Ron Goulet.
Yes.
Sarah Einstein.
Yes.
Spencer Usery. Stephanie Gillison.
Yes.
Wes Smith.
Yes.
Zibingao. Okay, the motion passes. I'll type it up and then I'll post it on our website and I will send it to the UFC and to UTK so that it can proceed. All right, unfinished business. I'll give you a very quick update. So as you know, last semester we passed a resolution calling for some type of paid family medical leave for 9-month faculty. So we have been discussing the issue at UFC, the University Faculty Council. We had a more than a half-hour discussion with the president in December, and then we discussed it again at this meeting that we had yesterday. So there's 2 updates related to that. First, the UT system is bringing forward a draft paid parental leave policy. They had drafted this a year ago, but had delayed it because the governor had made a similar call. And so they had to wait to see what the governor did. And so they had to wait. Here they are a year later with a paid paternal leave policy. The draft that I've seen, and there's distributed to UFC, calls for all eligible employees, and this would include both 12-month and 9-month employees, would have access to 6 weeks of paid leave when they add a member to their family through childbirth or adoption. In the case of 12-month employees, they could add on top of the 6 weeks any leave they have from sick leave or annual leave. The 6 weeks does not come out of sick leave or annual leave. Everybody's just given the 6 weeks. And then if you have accrued sick leave or annual leave, which in our case means 12-month employees, they can add on top of that 6 weeks. They didn't say at the meeting that was going before the board in February, but I can only assume that's their next step. We discussed that policy for quite some time. The vice president of HR, the UT general counsel were there, and we talked about it. I did express some concerns. I think the policy is fantastic for 12-month employees and will, mean that you get 6 weeks and then you can add on top of that through your annual leave and your sick leave. I do have concerns about it for 9-month faculty, since we do not accrue sick leave or annual leave. It's unclear how you would get anything beyond the 6 weeks. There was talk of, we already have existing, I'm going to get the name of it wrong, but we can make these agreements where we can adjust our workload, work reassignment. I forget how it's phrased. I did point out those aren't actually leaves because you're still working. You just might not be in the classroom. And so I'm going to continue to push for leave. I also pointed out this does not cover illness. It does not cover caring for people, family members who are ill. This is specific to the addition of a family member through childbirth or adoption. I think they'll move forward with it. I think it will be applied to 9-month faculty. The people on the call did agree this does not solve all our problems, and that we will need to continue to have discussions about how we can move forward with ensuring guaranteed paid family medical leave for 9-month employees. To that end, because of course UTC passed a resolution, I shared it with the UFC, hoping that other campuses would join us. There's been some hesitation by the other campuses, and part of the hesitation, both from the campuses and the system, so there's somewhat a perception that this is not something faculty actually want. So we're going to do a survey to actually ask faculty with particular interest in 9-month faculty. We're going to ask all faculty because that's how you ask, but then we're going to sort out who's 9 and 12 because we'll ask you, and then the results will show the 9-month faculty. But we're going to ask, would you like a guarantee of paid leave? And then we're going to ask faculty to rank. So there's different approaches to this. Do we take a accrued sick leave approach, the way that the locally governed institutions like MTSU, ETSU, TTU take? Do we take an approach where there's a policy that says you can have up to X number of weeks, approved by fill in the blank who the person should be? And we ask in the survey, like, who do you think should be the approver of said leave? So we're going to try to gather some information, see how much support there is. My hope, so I'll be really frank with everyone, there's a representative from Martin who is very opposed to any changes in current leave. And so he's opposed to the creation of any policies related to 9-month leave. He says he speaks for Martin, and he may, but this survey will show, is he speaking for all of Martin, or is he speaking for himself and a smaller group of faculty? So the survey is really going to get an idea of how widespread is the interest in a policy. And then we'll continue to push the system to do something. So that's my update. Any questions about 9-month leave?
Charlie, or to what end was Stephanie, myself, and our committee's report kind of considered in this meeting? Because I know that we, recommended for full semester, et cetera, like a full-on sick leave. So I'm curious what that had a role in anything, because I'm makes me sad to hear what you say based upon what we submitted and our reasonings behind it.
So we share the report. No one seems to have responded to it. Now, the paid parental leave, the PPL, which is the 6 weeks, that was drafted long before. This was drafted a year ago. And we did talk about it in the meeting. 6 weeks is only a small portion of a semester. What are we talking, faculty are work on these 16-week semesters. And so how does a 6 week fall into it? And the essential answer is, we'll just figure it out. So your report was shared. That's really about it doesn't seem anyone has done anything.
Charlene, can I just, your report was shared with the UFC. It wasn't shared with the people who came up with this policy. So I don't want you to think that this policy was in any way dismissive of what the UTC group did. It wasn't. This policy, like Charlene said, it's actually been working its way. The policy chain is very, very slow. And that policy has been working its way in the chain from over a year ago. So please don't feel sad that they ignored, because we haven't even gotten that far yet with what we're doing. It's two different policies that happen to have a small tether between the two of them.
Other questions, comments?
Hey, Charlene, this is Katie. One thing that I would like to kind of stress, and it is challenging as a 12-month faculty, because we all have different issues concerning leave and the accrual leave. But I think that what that 6-week policy is trying to do is try to breach some sort of equitable statement across all classifications of employees, because there's even differences among exempt and non-exempt staff and the amount of leave that people accrue, and it is very unequitable in a lot of ways. So I would just stress that although we are Faculty Senate, that we consider all of the issues that leave has for all different types of employees, because I think it's going to end up coming down to that in the end. I know as a brand new faculty member who came in and then had a pregnancy, even as a 12-month, I had to go into leave without pay status because you don't accrue enough leave early on, So I think that there are broad issues that I know have been discussed in all of these groups, but I would hesitate to make it only a 9-month. I would make this kind of issues that there are really specific issues with each class of employee, and trying to strike fairness across all the various ways that we take and accrue or don't have leave is a big challenge. And I know you guys know that, but it's big for every class of employee, and it's inequitable in lots of different ways that we might not see of each other because of what we know about our leave.
I agree, and I do think this PPL is great, particularly for 12-month employees, because it does give you an upfront 6 weeks that you can then add to. So yeah, if you are a relatively new employee, you have a base to start from. The reason we passed our resolution, and the reason I bring this up in every system level meeting I can, is and I speak specifically about 9-month FML leave needs, is because at this present time, the only guarantees 9-month employees have of any paid leave is if we need an organ transplant, or as was pointed out in yesterday's meeting, we become injured during an international competition. So maybe you can hit the double whammy of an international competition and then needing an organ transplant.
Yeah, and I get that. I'm just saying that there are those challenges at every level that even the 6 weeks of leave doesn't address for any and all of us. So I suggest we keep pushing forward, but that's probably what you're seeing in this leave being pushed, is that it is some sort of compromise outside of the accrual of leave portion of this that would equalize in some ways some of that.
And I should say the PPL was planned long before we started our push about 9-month. The PPL was meant to have been adopted last year, but then the governor had a decree that everybody would do 12 weeks, and so the system kind of held off. But yeah, So I fully expect them to move forward with a PPL at what I assume is the February board meeting. Okay, faculty concerns. Anyone with a faculty concern? Maybe I tired everyone out because we have no faculty concerns.
Charlene, there were a couple comments in
Oh.
in the chat.
Ooh, thanks. I'm having trouble scrolling up in my chat, so I can only see the last comment or two.
Okay, Brian had one on paid parental leave, and he's looking for HR links for policies, and he can't find them on time off pay policies. Sorry, I can't read. So on the time off page of the website, there appears to be an absence of links related to parental leave.
I would say, well, the parental leave policy that I mentioned is a draft, so it's not out there on the internet. What I would suggest is anybody who has questions about UT system policies, the place to go is tennessee.edu. So it's like the hub of everything system. And you click on HR, and then you can find an enormous number of policies. So you can just go to tennessee.edu and Google and just go into the search and say sick leave, for example, and you'll see the policies related to sick leave pools, etc. So tennessee.edu is a go-to resource for finding any system policy.
And then Susan was interested about the idea of stillbirth. Does that constitute birth of a child? That obviously is parental leave, but that's also maybe bereavement, something of bereavement. So if there's anything that they're talking about in your UFC meetings.
That's a good question. So the draft we saw was very narrow in its definition of parental leave. And there were questions about like other scenarios. I think somebody brought up, what if you're a godparent and then you essentially have to take, over responsibility of care for the child, like through a death or what have you. And they said, there'll always be these other examples where they were implying there would be flexibility. I'll let HR and our HR, I always get the letters wrong, but Lori Poe take those questions up in another venue. But yeah, I mean, I get that sometimes it's in the details. And I do see Keenan has made a comment, and this, because I can see the last few, and this is true. So we're advocating for 9-month FMLA, paid FMLA for a variety of reasons. One, to protect all of us that are already here and have had needs that options didn't really meet. But also it's a recruitment issue. And UTC is attempting right now to recruit a faculty member who has asked very specific questions about what we offer and what our guarantees are. And, has offers from other universities have very clear guarantees. And our response is just trust us. And I suspect, if I was on the market and I was being told, here's a guarantee and here's a just trust me, I'd go with the guarantee. So. Yes, and that has been brought up, and I will continue to bring that one up. I didn't talk about that at this last meeting, but I'll be sure to bring that up the next time we get to talk about this topic. It's not just about current employees, which is a really big issue, but also about our ability to recruit future employees. Okay, other faculty concerns.
If I might, I'm concerned. I'm not reflecting concerns of my colleagues in my department or college. It's just a personal concern. It has to do with the termination of a certain football coach for comments that were broadcast on what I believe was his personal media account. I was a little surprised at the lack of process associated with dismissing a member of the staff, and I wonder, are we faculty subject to the same, let's say, violation of process if we happen to make comments that don't conform with certain norms.
I will say as a point of clarity, because this has come up in the university update the last 2 weeks, the assistant coach was not fired, he resigned. And he resigned like out of the gate, like they went to talk to him and he resigned. So they didn't get to the point of having to consider whether they terminate him or not. He resigned.
Thank you for that clarification.
The local media incorrectly reported that he was terminated. And then the Times Free Press did change that after, they updated their story, but other local media did not. But he resigned. I don't know if that changes your opinion of the situation.
Not sure. Thank you.
Brian Rogers has a hand up.
Yeah, I hate to prolong this meeting, but I think that the question may still be relevant regardless of the situation, as I'm fairly certain within the last 5 to 10 years, there have been several individuals, regardless of whether they're faculty or not, who have been in a quit or resign type situation. And so typically the resignation is at least the part that we hear about when it comes to the official, the official communication to the campus.
So noted. Yeah, we'll bring that concern up. Other concerns? Okay. Oh, sorry.
One thing that we probably when oftentimes when like coaches come to campuses, they do sign contracts, so they do have to be careful as to what they do post. Stop, my dogs are barking. And the things that they share on social media accounts, because they can be dismissed over such things because they do sign a contract oftentimes. And social media is never protected, so always be careful what you post.
And I also believe that a lot of the coaches are using social media to talk to recruits. So it's not just the fact that this is not a personal account. He's using that Twitter account to also, a lot of coaches are using those to communicate with recruits and players.
I would just add, as one of the people who has to oversee the policy for the university, but there's the Free Speech Protection Act that has much different implications for students and faculty than it does for staff. So faculty should be aware of that. As a staff member whose primary role is not faculty, I don't have the same protections that the rest of the tenured faculty or non-tenured faculty do on this call. And the same goes for students. So that is a state law specifically with this regard.
Charlene, if I may, and I don't know if it will change anybody's opinion of what happened or what didn't, but it's also important to know that the Twitter account that was used specifically listed the employee's UTC affiliation and his post on campus. And so it could have very easily been construed as him speaking on behalf of the program or the university because of the way the Twitter account was set up.
Thank you for those details. It helps me to understand it a little bit better.
Other faculty concerns? We'll move on to announcements. I don't have any. Does anybody have an announcement? All right, so now we move to the fabulous time of adjournment. Do I have a first for adjournment?
Move to adjourn.
And do we have a second?
Second.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks for staying through the long meeting. We'll see you in February.
Thank you, Charlene.
Thanks, Charlene.